generally speaking, no matter which path or which company you choose to deal with, those questions are 5 times as important to you if you don't have insurance as if you do. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have insurance or can't get insured, then all the things they were willing to sign off on to insure your house from burning down, you need to make sure you're doing them because it's your bank account.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Wiz is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and security thought leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Bryan Hurd, Managing Director, Chief Office Seattle at Aon Cyber and founder Cyberintelligence Program at NCIS for the U.S. Navy.
I appreciate you having me on. I was originally attracted to the cybersecurity field as far back as almost grade school when we had our first computer and I started figuring out how to write some small programs or play with different things. And as I went through high school and then ultimately the Naval Academy, the technology started getting larger and larger and more into our lives. And then in 1993, I had the opportunity to go to NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And while I was doing terrorism watch duties there, started looking at the cybersecurity side of the Navy and was able to be the founder of their cyber counterespionage program. So that was 30 years ago, almost one more year and 30 years ago in 1993. So I've been in the community ever since, and what a ride it's been. My current role is I am the Chief of Office and Managing Director for Aon in Seattle for their Cyber Solutions Division, also known as Strauss Freeburg.
Well, thank you for your service. You've obviously have contributed quite a bit to something that's very much needed today. So Bryan, we're here to talk about cyber insurance, and I love talking with you because you lay it on the line as to what these issues are, and when we should have cyber insurance and when we shouldn't. So today there's been a lot of conversation around cyber insurance. Is that something that organizations need? I mean, I'm hearing from some CISOs that the costs of this cyber insurance is going way up.
It is. And so looking at, as many CISOs do, and your podcasts often support, the strategic side of this, the longitudinal side of this over decades in our careers. 5, 6, 7 years ago, nobody had cyber insurance. 5, 6, 7 years from now, nobody won't. But what we've seen, like we've seen with other insurance markets, and I'll talk about the insurance, history as little as possible, but there's a good analogy later, is at first, everybody issued out policies and really didn't understand it. And then there were a bunch of claims from the tsunamis and hurricanes of ransomware and business email compromise and invoice scams and data exfiltration that have hit a lot of our companies, countries, cities, and so forth. And that led the insurance companies to harden the market, give out less insurance, or have harder qualifying questions to make sure that things are in place, that you're secure, that you have less chance of having a flood or fire, just like with your home policy.
And so what are some of those things that, that they've been asking for in recent years where I heard that the initial cyber insurance policies might ask you 5 to 7 questions, and now you're getting these full assessments. Are there certain things that insurance companies are looking for to make sure that they're in the policy?
Yes. And what I'll say is, to my fellow CISOs and strategic leaders around the community, this is why I took a job at an insurance company after having been the chief of cybercrime intelligence for Microsoft and other really great jobs too. I wanted to see this tectonic shift in our community, and I wanted to be on the inside of it. And Aon, as a broker above all the insurance carriers and a fiduciary to the client side, allows me to see that and allows me to be on the CISO side of the table, and so which is where I feel most comfortable. And what I'll say is the reason that those 5 questions, imagine if your homeowner's policy only had 5 questions. Do you have a house? Yes. Do you have a lock on the front door? Yes. They don't ask you about smoke detectors in your kids' bedrooms or other things that we all have come to understand. Cyber's doing the same. They're looking at all of the house fires, all of the floods of the other companies around the globe. And you'll be glad to know it's the root cause analysis of those events that are driving the questions. It is not random. It is highly scientific and a very interesting process to watch. We can probably go into detail later, but I'll say that the questions are now around 95 questions in the base cyber insurance qualifier. And then there's probably another 20 in the ransomware supplemental because of the issues of ransomware around that component of cyber insurance. And we can talk about sublimits and other things as we get into the discussion, but CISOs need to understand and help their chief risk officer. But one thing I'll say that we're trying to do on the insurance side of the equation is the time and energy that you spend answering those questions actually gives you some reporting back that can help your strategy if it's done right. We'll go from there.
Yeah, I've always found that we're working with auditors, and I had a role where I was the global CISO for a major accounting firm at one time, that when you're working with the auditors, it actually can help support to drive your program forward. And so I sort of see the same thing with working with these, cyber insurance questionnaires to see where some of these gaps are that can be filled for, can be future investment opportunities.
It absolutely is that way. And again, without being overly complimentary to the industry I've decided to go into, this is the same virtuous loop that you saw way back in the ancient days when steam engines were used in cities, and they used to blow up and unfortunately kill a lot of people until Hartford Steam Boiler Company, now the world's largest insurance company, made a steam loop. They made a piece of architecture that stopped the engines from blowing up. It's a pressure relief valve. So to my CISOs, the insurance companies have been dictating architecture in steam engines and automobiles with airbags, crumple zones, and ABS. Those were invented a lot of times to avoid death and injury by insurance companies more than auto companies wanted new functions. It's the same with cyber. And we can talk about those root cause. I have a list of about 9 or so. But it is absolutely that same kind of standards-driven, best practices-driven approach. These questions from the underwriters are not picked at random, and they are scored based on a lot of heavy machine learning.
What do you see as some of those root cause areas or areas of technology that organizations absolutely must implement if they're going to get a reasonable policy?
So among the overall list, I'll say the top 3 are multi-factor authentication, everywhere, every time, endpoint protection and response, and backups. Those are kind of some of the areas where if you don't have good hygiene, and it's, by the way, the same hygiene that your board's going to want, the NIST standard auditor is going to want, all of this is wrapped around the NIST standard, even in the insurance industry too. It's the due diligence that you as a CISO or security leader would want anyway. But those are the 3 of the 9 or so critical areas that protect the organization from a ransomware landing, killing the backups, and extorting them or putting them out of business.
So are the backups being seen as critical today with the double extortion attempts where they're actually exfiltrating data and then exposing a piece of that?
Great question and good nuance. It is a double extortion. In a ransomware, a lot of times the adversaries will come in, do all the things in the kill chain, lateral, et cetera, et cetera. This is a learned audience, so I'm not going to worry about that. And then they will exfiltrate data and then flatten the backups and extort. Now, the extortion has 2 parts. Decryption extortion. You must pay for the key to get your data back up and running. So the first part, that is overcome by backups, which is why many of the groups have gone to that secondary extortion. But what I'll say is people are like, well, then they just pay for the key. Restoration from decryption is much more horrific than restoring your business from the backups, no matter how bad your backups are. So the process is just an amazingly horrific process to try and decrypt. And in the encryption part of the extortion, the things that fail encryption or are mangled during it or corrupted during encryption are often big files and things in flight, which are your crown jewels. The small files aren't going to be a problem to be encrypted. It's your large backups or email repositories and your databases in flight that will most likely be the failure parts of a decryption. So you definitely don't want to try and go that route if you have a lot of that in your architecture. So if you can get through without paying for the key, now the question is, do you pay around embarrassment? And surprisingly, this is not a technical question. It is a question for your CEO, your general counsel, your chief of operations. It's their Johnson & Johnson moment. What do we do about trust? And the thing I'm seeing a lot of times in that secondary extortion, the companies decide not to pay to pull the pin on their own grenade and go through the incident and the embarrassment and message to their clients and own their own narrative and not give money to the bad guys. I have seen other companies that have you in the front pages where they've gone a different way and it comes out later they paid for a delay and it doesn't always look great. Now, there are, in every situation, tons of variables and equations, but that's what the board will be, and the senior leadership team will be in a room talking about after you've told them they don't need to buy the keys.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. How often when we're paying for the keys or paying so that information won't get exposed, does that actually happen? Is that actually honored by the attackers?
So I'll break that into 2 parts. First and foremost, the negotiation for the decryption keys. If you use professional vendors, there is a known process by which the victim provides a few files for proof of life the decryption key works. I have never worked a case yet at the enterprise level or even at a small company level where using the right process, and if a company was unfortunately extorted and needed to pay for the keys have always worked. Now, the percent of recovery from that decryption process is a whole different problem, but the key itself worked.
So what is it that causes the failure of the restoration process if the key is working? Encryption
itself. So when you go to start processing, if the encryption of a large file or a database, if a large file is interrupted, you've encrypted a corrupted file. If a database is in flight and services aren't shut down, it'd be like trying to run your backup while you're transacting without a Lambda architecture. So it is merely the logic of file processing and encryption, which will lead to horrific results. And say a server is detecting encryption and you shut it down halfway through, which is probably a good thing to do. Whatever was being encrypted halfway through at that moment is also going to be corrupted. So there's multitudes of reasons that encryption would fail just logically. Also, these adversaries spend a lot of money on encryption. They spend almost nothing on the decryption part of it. And you can't trust the software they give you anyway. You have to pull the keys out and put it into a piece of trusted software. That's also part of the standard negotiation and services process around a breach. Because if you're loading the adversary software decrypter, you're literally loading malware onto your system to decrypt it. So I highly don't recommend that approach.
So in terms of the backups, are they going in and destroying the backups? Are you seeing, is that happening a lot, or is that more of a theoretical risk that's happening?
It is. As often as they can find them and do it, they do it. And then that goes back to the areas I was talking about the root cause analytics that are showing up in all these questions in the insurance industry. The disaster recovery backups is one of the top three, along with, of course, network segmentation, VPN, NMFA, privileged account using a PAM, ... and all the things that every one of your listeners has been screaming at the top of their lungs that we should be doing for the last 30 years I've been in the community. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability still rules the day. So these are, the good news is the insurance company has caught up to, the insurance industry has caught up to what we've all been preaching for years. And it's because they see these people get in, flatten the backup, and then launch the encryption. They want to make sure before they launch the encryption that they've got you. Now, we are seeing that they sometimes only target Microsoft Office files to allow companies to still operate to a degree while their data is encrypted. So we're seeing sometimes they're a little bit more surgical, but it depends on the adversary that's after you. Some of them are not as polite to their victims as others, if there's such a thing.
Interesting. So if somebody is going after a cyber insurance policy to mitigate some of their risk, do they need to have all of these things in place before even pursuing that policy, or are there policies that are written understanding that those things aren't completed yet?
So the brokering process, and great question. So what I'll say first and foremost is even if you don't think you're going to get insurance, go get the questionnaire and fill it out. Now, whether you submit it back to your insurance company, and again, I'm from a broker, so insurance companies act and have their salespeople acting for that company, brokers act for you and take your package to market to go to look at many insurance companies or many markets. So there's a difference. I apologize for the pedantic nuance, but it's important in my community. And when you select your path to figuring out insurance. But generally speaking, no matter which path or which company you choose to deal with, those questions are 5 times as important to you if you don't have insurance as if you do. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have insurance or can't get insured, then all the things they were willing to sign off on to insure your house from burning down, you need to make sure you're doing them because it's your bank account is now on the hook, not some insurance company's pool of premiums. So the process to ask and answer those questions is a good idea, no matter which path you choose.
Now, I've heard some CISOs saying that some of these insurance rates have gone up like 100, 200, 300% in the last year, and some of the deductibles are going up and the premiums are coming down. Is there some sort of shift happening within the insurance company?
Absolutely. In the insurance market, yes.
Yeah.
So that's what's called a hardening market. So what happens is, especially with new things, and cyber in the insurance world is relatively new compared to the decades and almost centuries of longitudinal data and information about, human medical conditions or automobile accidents or other things. Cyber is relatively new. So figuring out how to underwrite the process, make sure that the insured is a good risk, is an important part of it. Everybody was learning a lot. And over the last couple of years, some insurance companies paid out 2 or 3x of what they collected. That is an abysmal result. Normally in the insurance industry, you want to try and collect $1 in premium and pay out maybe 90 some odd cents in claims and make a small profit. If you're paying out $2 for every dollar you collected, you're in the red, like unbelievably so. Mm-hmm. So then the first thing you do is say, stop insuring people that from a cyber perspective, eat fat fried turkeys in their own living rooms. Like, don't insure people who play with matches. And in a cyber context, that means not having MFA, not having any network segmentation, and your backups aren't on a different set of credentials or things like that. The root causes for how an adversary or an arsonist burned down your insured's house.
Yeah, it's hard to make money that way. I used to work for a large health insurance company, and whatever people think about health insurance companies, they actually pay out a very high percentage of what's taken in on claims, but it has to be less than $1, or you go out of business.
Exactly, and I do want to say there is a lack of understanding and some rumors about, and cyber policies don't pay. Again, not on the cases I work where a cyber policy is in place. Yes, there's a discussion of the deductible. There's a discussion of the coverage for that type of event. But I'll tell you, as a homeowner, one time, and I was at RSA with a bunch of you who are listening to this podcast, my wife called me and told me our basement was flooded with 2 inches of water. Well, the funny thing is when you get home, you have to figure out where the water came from and whether your insurance covers that or not. If it was rainwater from outside, the answer is no. If the water heater failed, the answer is yes, insurance covered it. Mm-hmm. The insurance company didn't, do evil math to try and not pay me. They insured me for certain things that I had never read in my own policy, and none of us have. The same for cyber. You need to understand the trigger events that are covered and what your coverage is. And then, of course, how qualified you need to be, the protections you need to have in place to be a good risk to insure.
So let's say you go through this assessment, you answer all these questions, and you have MFA in place, and you have backups in place, and you're segmenting your networks, and you're doing security training, and you're doing all the things that are listed in this assessment. But as we know, nothing is 100%. So I've got that laptop that was found unencrypted, that was in the training room, and that was the one that where we had the exposure. At what point does that become a point where the insurance company says, there's that laptop that one wasn't encrypted and that caused the problem, and so now we're not going to pay? Or is there some, area tolerance of risk that's accepted in the whole scheme of that?
Great question. I'm not in the claims part of the process, although the invoices from and the things we do in being kind of the serve pro of cyber in doing breach response and things like that for what our teams do often end up in the claims process. So couple things about that. One, when you have a breach, make sure to track your costs, not just the cost of the outside people, the cost of your inside team. Do you have a time card code to capture the cost? Do you know how to capture business interruption costs? Because that's a different policy. Or your cyber policy might cover some stuff. Your crime policy might cover others. And again, I won't go too far down the insurance route. I know that doesn't get many people kind of nod off if I do. But you got to understand what happened and what you're claiming. And then when you get to root cause, a lot of times, if you were doing best practices and reasonable, I haven't, at least in my experience for my clients, haven't seen where it didn't pay, blaming the user for, accepting the MFA push even when they're on vacation, which is another tactic of the adversary. They'll just MFA 7 times until the user gets annoyed while they're on their weekend and accepts it anyway. So, have that keep you up at night. The But it's important to understand that process so you can capture the right data during the firefight, and make sure if you're rebuilding your house during, like you have an incident and you're trying to respond to the incident and you're also trying to recover and maybe at the same time improve your security a little. Imagine if you had a fire in your bathroom and you go, okay, I'm going to call the insurance company, but I'm going to put, better chandeliers, a nicer mirror, and I'm finally going to put those marble tabletops in the bathroom. Yeah, that's not insurance. That's an improvement. Right. Keep those statements of work and those items separate from the recovery claim you're doing to your insurance company. Because if those costs get mingled, you're going to spend months disambiguating, getting back to the state before which the event occurred, or an improved state that you feel you now need to be at. And that's lost a lot of times until it's a horrific admin endeavor later.
I think that's great advice. Well, this has been very, very informative, Bryan. Are there any other, pieces of advice as people are, looking at cyber insurance and evaluating cyber insurance and figuring out if they need it or how much that they need?
I think work with your chief risk officer, if it's your general counsel, talk to them about the risk management layer. And this, by the way, this discussion of assurance elevates CISOs to talk about enterprise risk management more than the particular firewall, AKA smoke detector. And when you look at these questions, these are merely the smoke detectors, radon detectors, sprinkler systems, and fire doors of our day. It is the same thing as if you were building a hotel or making a ship, me being Navy. These are the watertight compartments and fire suppression systems on a ship. You don't want the ship to sink, but you'll lose a compartment or two. Same thing with a hotel. They're designed that way. This is a wonderful opportunity for CISOs to talk to their boards at a level we've all dreamed and wanted for years to be doing. So making lemonade out of lemons. And then also to answer your question about the rates. Yes, they are going up. Yes, I've seen premium increases at those levels. Your better chances are when you have better security, not only for your insurance, but also for your company running as a whole. And at a certain point, you may make a decision that the insurance is too expensive, but then remember, you are the insurance company and you'll want to spend some of that money actually answering and addressing the questions the insurance company was concerned about, because there will be nobody to pay the ransom behind you. It'll be your company only. And that's a horrible place to be. And I hope none of your listeners are in that, but I know some of them will be this year, and I'm sorry. But thanks for taking the time to go through this. Insurance is there, as you've talked about in medical. It is there for certain reasons, but you need to understand why you're buying it, what it covers, and what it doesn't, and what the limits and deductibles are, things like that.
Well, and I think, you raise a very great point. I think with the working with the board, if we look at the NACD guidance where we had the 5 different principles, and I detailed all of that in the chapter, in the CISO Compass book. And we didn't talk a lot about cyber insurance in there, but that's one of the areas that the board has to look at risk and decide, do they want to accept that risk? Do they want to transfer the risk? Do they want to mitigate the risk? And one of those key methods of transferring that risk is to use cyber insurance. And I think more and more companies are having to have that is not as the solution, but as another mitigation tactic for some risks to help limit some of that damage.
And the other final thought on this is, no matter where you are in the global CISO food chain, if you're a big and looking at 100 vendors that support you, you're going to want them to have insurance and the right controls to do business with you. If you're a medium-sized company in the United States, you're going to get the requirements coming down from the big CISOs on this call too. And if you're a small, the mediums are going to drive that down to you, and then the due diligence of your board. So sooner or later, we're all going to have to answer these questions about best practices for firewalls, MFA, and other things. I actually find that the insurance company is helping lead the way to a degree without a lot of the vendor-centric thing. They don't care about what fire detection system you have or what smoke detectors. They just need to know that you have these types of behaviors, endpoint, MFA, and others. I think it's a really good way to look at our community with a bit of noise reduction about, particular technologies or solutions that often shift. Good behavior doesn't.
Great place to leave it. Thanks a lot, Bryan. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're a very busy person, so thanks for sharing this with our CISO community. Wiz is on a mission to help every organization rapidly identify and remove critical risks in their cloud environments. Purpose-built for the cloud, Wiz delivers full-stack visibility, accurate risk prioritization, and enhanced business agility. Wiz connects in minutes using an agentless approach that scans both platform configurations and inside every workload. We perform a deep assessment that goes beyond what standalone CSPM and CWPP tools offer to find the toxic combination of flaws that represent real risk. To learn more about Wiz, please visit securityweekly.com/Wiz.